Hi guys, Matt Easton here. So I'm doing another short video, so it's relatively easy to upload while I'm on the move. So I'm looking at your comments underneath my video. Thank you again for coming up with hundreds of ideas of things I could video, and this will be very useful to me actually in the future. But Meow Nayar, I hope I said your name correctly. I don't know why I did an accent with it then. But said, I've always wanted to know what the hell is up with the 1796 heavy cavalry sword. What? I hear people asking this all the time. So the 1796 heavy cavalry sword, for those who don't know, in 1796 the British Army adopted three new patterns of sword for use in the army. There's the infantry officer's spadroon, which is a narrow thrust-centric sword. As regular viewers of my channel will know, I'm not a fan of spadroons in general because they're not very good at cutting, they're not very good at thrusting. The famous 1796 light cavalry sabre, which is the very curved sword that some people say is modelled on a tulwar, which is absolute bullshit. It's not modelled on a tulwar, it's modelled on Hungarian and Austrian and Polish type Eastern European hussar sabres. So that's the famous one. And then there is the 1796 heavy cavalry sword. It's not sabre because it's not curved, it is straight. And for those of you who know the series featuring Richard Sharp, obviously a series of books written by Bernard Cornwell, but also the popular TV series adaptation of it, he uses the 1796 heavy cavalry sword. Now I've always thought it's funny that he uses this sword because of course he's an infantry officer, in fact he's an officer of rifles. In actual fact, officers of rifles predominantly used what was known as a flank officer's sabre, which was like a light curved version, or more curved version of the 1796 light cavalry sabre. They tend to stick to light curved swords. However, he uses a heavy straight sword that is given to him, I believe, by a superior officer when they die. And it's kind of weird that he uses it, not necessarily because it's a heavy cavalry sword, because actually officers in the field could pretty much choose whatever swords they wanted. The thing that's really weird about it is it's a trooper's sword, that is, it's a normal private soldier's weapon. It's not an officer's weapon. And I think it would have been more realistic if Bernard Cornwell had had him use a heavy cavalry officer's sword, which were generally speaking better made, not quite as heavy, nicer hilts, a bit nicer to look at, and nicer swords in the hand generally than the trooper's version. However, what I will say, keeping this very brief about the 1796 heavy cavalry sword, is that it's not a bad sword actually, and I think it's only got bad press from people writing in relatively modern times talking about sword patterns and kind of harping on about how fantastic the light cavalry sabre was and how bad the heavy cavalry sword was. And actually there's very little or no direct period evidence that that was the prevailing view of the time. The heavy cavalry sword was used very successfully right the way through the Napoleonic Wars and famously at the Battle of Waterloo by the Scots Greys and the other heavy cavalry against French cuirassiers and French light cavalry as well, and lancers in some cases, Polish lancers. So it was used successfully, it did its job, and there's no period evidence that I'm aware of that it was disliked as a weapon. It is quite blade heavy, that point of balance is quite far from the hand. However, it's not particularly long, it's not particularly heavy, it's got a good hand guard, quite good level of protection, and the quality is usually reasonably good as well, because sword blades were fairly well regulated after about 1790. So I don't think it's a bad sword at all. It's quite similar to earlier back swords in actual fact, in terms of balance of weight and general statistics. So there we go guys, I don't think it's a bad sword, in fact I quite like it and I wouldn't mind using it at all. The only thing to mention, and I think the only criticism, is really about the hatchet point. That is, you've got a back edge that's straight and a front edge that comes quite abruptly over a short distance to the point, which isn't very good for giving point, for thrusting. And so famously before Waterloo they gave the order to spear point all the swords. So they essentially ground the back edge up to make the point in the middle of the blade, which was more effective for thrusting. So yes, the points weren't very good, but the points were improved. Once the points were improved, I think it's a pretty good sword. And I own an officer's version, and yeah, it's nice. It's a nice thing. So there we go, guys. Cheers.